What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And today we're going to be closing out the Pioneer RCQ season on our last deck. That if you are going to play in an RCQ, if you're going to try to last chance qualify, whatever. Currently in this format, this is is the most played deck in the format, and probably still considered one of the best decks by a lot of people, even though I think there's probably a few other decks that you could play that are going to be, in general, just better suited, but the starts that this deck has is hard to deny. This is easily one of the best decks you could be playing in the format. So today we're going to be taking a look at Rakdos Vampires, of course, rehashing the details and everything, and, actually kind of looking at some pretty neat omissions from this deck, and we'll kind of see why, because this deck used to be $1,000 and it is now half that. Of course, before we get too deep into the video and we talk about Rakdos Vampires, if you're not here, subscribe to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where we talk a lot about the Modern and Pioneer format along with some other longer form videos, then please consider subscribing and ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted, as it is a free and easy way to support me and my content. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Rakdos Vampires. This is the big bad of the format. This is the deck that basically, if you go to a tournament, you're more likely, this is the deck that you're going to see. You're going to see at least like one or two people playing Rakdos Vampires in the room, and then it's just going to scale up from there. So what exactly is this deck able to do that it's basically one of the most played decks in the format? So obviously the best combo, if you will, in the deck is Sorin Imperious Bloodlord and Vein Ripper. So Sorin Imperious Bloodlord is a 3-mana planeswalker that comes in with 4 loyalty that you can immediately use his last ability of -3. You may put a vampire creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Obviously Vein Ripper is the most costly vampire you can put into play that actually does something in this format. So a Vein Ripper is a 6-mana 6/5 flying ward, sacrifice a creature. Whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this is kind of a really aggressive card. For one, there's only really one removal spell that deals with Vein Ripper very cleanly on the early turns of the game, and I would say that is something like Lightning Axe from the Phoenix deck, but then they're going to have to sacrifice their Ledger Shredder, which does blunt a lot of offense, which, being the person that has played kind of a lot of Phoenix, having Ledger Shredder on the battlefield and getting multiple activations or triggers of its connivability is very important. There is some other scenarios that you can create where, you can kind of get a Vein Ripper off the battlefield early, but chances are it's going to stick around for a turn, which sucks because then Sorin can +1 to give it a +1/+1 counter since it is a vampire, gets Death Touch and Lifelink. It's going to be a 7-power vampire that's going to make a 14-point life swing total, or at least at the very least a 7, I guess, if you chump block it, but really that's, again, not ideal if you're necessarily in the kind of Phoenix camp, because then you're more than likely blocking with a Ledger Shredder, and then you're going to end up losing some life, and they're going to be gaining some life in the process as well. Just overall, a very annoying combo to deal with. And the deck doesn't stop there with being powerful, because then it also just gets to play a very powerful mid-range strategy, starting off with cards like Bloodtithe Harvester, which is a 2-mana 3/2 that's going to create a blood token when it comes into play. And you can tap, sacrifice the Bloodtithe Harvester, give a creature -X/-X, where X is twice the number of blood tokens you control. So if you have 1 blood token, you're going to be able to give something -2/-2. If you have 2, it's going to be -4/-4, so on. This, in conjunction with the other red card that we were splashing in the deck, and these are the only red cards that this deck has decided to play now that we are towards the end of the RCQ season, and that's Fable the Mirrorbreaker. Probably a surprise to nobody. This is probably the best red card and the only reason to splash red in your deck anyway. Of course, we get to the backside of it. You create a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste. You sacrifice it at the beginning of next end step. All the kind of value this deck generates, whether the 2/2 gets in 1 or 2 attacks, making multiple treasure tokens, getting to discard dead cards in the matchup, kind of like removal spells for the more control matchups, getting rid of some of your other creatures that aren't really basically cards that aren't doing anything. You're getting rid of your discard spells in the late game because your opponent's like top decking at that point, to then go and hopefully draw removal spells or threats to be able to close out the game. Whatever it is, Fable the Mirrorbreaker does a little bit of everything. And of course, when we have 2 flip Fables in play, you just end up getting to make a ton of them on your opponent's end step, and then you get to essentially copy whatever non-legendary creature that you have. which I believe is everything except for Kalidas Trader Get, which that is actually a sweet art for Kalidas. I did not know that one existed. But, with Fable, with even just one flip Fable, getting to create Blood Tithe Harvesters, you're essentially going to make 3/2s that are either going to be decently aggressive. It's going to allow you to attack for, up to 6 damage, or you can just make blood tokens by making copies of Blood Tithe Harvester. You make one on your opponent's end step, you untap, make another one. You're going to have, say, 3 blood tokens in play. You're going to be able to give -6/-6 to multiple creatures. It's also going to trigger Vein Ripper, meaning that your opponent's going to lose life when you sacrifice the Blood Tithe Harvesters, and more than likely lose life when they eventually kill the creature that they're targeting. Dusk Legion Zealot is like another way that you can kind of get some card draw going. You end up losing a life each time, so it's not nearly as like infinite, I would say. But either way, getting to like draw cards, and then this has a little bit of synergy with Sorin, because like even with the +1, you can make that pretty threatening, make it into a 2/2 and eventually a 3/3, or you can sacrifice it and essentially Lightning Helix your opponent or a creature or what have you, any target, and you're going to gain 3 life. Pretty neat there. Archfiend of the Dross is something that the Rakdos midrange decks played a lot of in conjunction with Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, and now the Vampires deck essentially gets to do it as well, kind of getting rid of Shieldred, which is obviously a card that we have neglected to talk about because she's not here, surprisingly, in a black midrange deck. But Archfiend of the Dross, 4 mana, 6/6 flying, enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you remove an oil counter from it, and then if it has no oil counters on it, you lose the game. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. So it kind of does its impression of like a Vein Ripper, and it's just a big creature. I mean, 4 mana, 6/6 is very hard to deal with. Your opponent doesn't really necessarily want to get rid of it, but with an Archfiend in conjunction with a Vein Ripper, your opponents really can't chump block forever. They're going to be losing 4 life, blocking this thing, plus, you have a Vein Ripper going. Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, too, like the combo that we pointed out, we're really getting as many copies of a creature that we want. Archfiend is just as good, if not better, than a Vein Ripper, just because, again, just having that extra point of toughness. I guess when you really have like 8 Archfiend of the Drosses or 8 Vein Rippers in play, it doesn't really matter because you're more than likely going to push through lethal, whether your opponent's like chump blocking, they're losing 1,000,000 life, actually probably losing less life not blocking than they do if they do block. So just kind of neat there. Basically, all roads lead to dead. In this deck in particular, we have 4 Thoughtseize, 2 Duress as like the discard spells. We have 4 Fatal Push and 2 Bitter Triumph as the removal spells. Of course, Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, and 25 lands to ensure that we can kind of hit our land drops every turn. Mostly every turn up to 4 mana. It is very possible to hardcast Vein Ripper, and it does come up, but obviously the more powerful play is playing a Sorin on turn 3 and putting this Vein Ripper into play. You have 4 Blackleaf Cliffs, you have 3 Blightstep Pathway, which is the red and black pathway, you have 4 Blood Crypt, you have 2 Hive of the Eye Tyrant as like a way in your own mana base to kind of put pressure on your opponent and deal with the graveyard in a very small way. 1 Mountain, you have 4 Mutavaults, which is every creature type when you activate it, which means that you can sacrifice it to Sorin to deal 3 damage to something and gain 3 life. You can activate and put +1/+1 counters on it. And a 3/3 with like lifelink Death Touch is very hard to deal with because your opponent's either going to be losing something a lot bigger, meaning that even some of your smaller vampires are going to be able to kind of run rampant on the battlefield, or Mutavault's going to continue to chunk in for more and more damage as your opponent can't really interact with it with sorcery speed removal. You have 4 Sulphur Springs, as again, more mana fixing, 2 Swamps, and a Takanuma to mill some cards, and then you can get a creature or planeswalker from your graveyard back to your hand. So this kind of lets you go get a Sorin if you have a Vein Ripper, or if you have a Sorin in play, you can go pick up another Vein Ripper if your opponent managed to get rid of it, kind of reestablish that. I mean, you can also get any one of these creatures as well, which are going to be very good pickups as well for the situation that obviously warrants it. I mean, we are playing a mid-range deck. We're going to see a lot of our deck from game to game, ideally. So Takanuma is essentially going to be able to find just about everything except maybe a Kalidas, like pretty reliably here. Sideboard, we have another Duress. We're going up to 7 discard spells. We have a Grafdigger's Cage, a Dusk of Night, or Night of Dusk's Shadow, 2 Reckoner Bankbuster, 2 Unlicensed Hearse, an Ashiok, a Dream Render, 2 Liliana of the Veil, 2 Path of Peril, and 2 Extinction Event as kind of like our kind of morphing into more of like a control-y mid-range deck where we're probably going a lot bigger with our creatures and just saving like our early turns kind of like for our removal spells until we can kind of slam a Haymaker. Even, you know, with things like Path of Peril, you know, we have a Vein Ripper in play, we have an Archfiend to the draw, so our opponent builds out a decent board, puts us to a low life total. Path of Peril, especially with like Vein Ripper in play, we're going to end up gaining, you know, 8-10 life. They're going to lose 10 life. They're going to take another 6 damage from the Vein Ripper, and life is going to be super difficult for them. But that is the Rakdos Vampires deck for the Pioneer format. Very little innovation, I would say, from the deck. I mean, aside from, you know, Shieldred being a big one, whether that was like cost concerns for this person in the Moto Pioneer Challenge or whatnot. In any case, it makes the deck a lot more affordable, and I don't think the deck really gets that much worse if it does get worse. Simply for the fact that Archfiend of the Dross is going to close out a game a lot faster. I think with the Amalia decks kind of being very popular, and with the Moto Greens and the Niv Delights being, you know, very good options, and of course, you know, Is It Phoenix being, you know, always a top 3 deck in the format, that the Rakdos Vampires list being just a little bit faster, being a lot more aggressive, I would say, kind of in the earlier turns of the game, and just trying to close it out, maybe play like 1 or 2 disruption pieces, you know, killing a key creature in the Amalia deck, or maybe taking a key piece from the Amalia deck to kind of disrupting Phoenix and the mono green decks long enough to where you can kind of get these big flyers in the air and then take out your opponent really before anyone else is able to get started. Has been a recipe for success. We've seen it a lot in Modern, and Pioneer is no different. If you're able to disrupt your opponent and then put a pretty fast clock on them, it takes some very specific draws to get out of it, where, you know, if you're giving them 3, 4, 5, 6 turns, it's not a guarantee that they'll end up getting out of it, but obviously it's a heck of a lot better than getting 1 or 2 turns. So, you know, that's the Rakdos Vampires deck for the Pioneer format. That's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what Pioneer deck you would like to see next. How are you going to be closing out the Pioneer RCQ season, as our kind of focus will shift towards the Modern RCQ season, as well as kind of preparing for the Pioneer RCQ once we have like Bloomburrow and any of the other sets that we're going to get, and kind of focus on testing for that as well. So if you are interested in any of that sort of stuff, you know, please be sure to, again, subscribe to the channel, ring notification bell for easy ways to support me and my content. We do a lot of Modern Pioneer stuff here, so if you want to stay in the loop on that, please consider doing so, as it's something that we do basically exclusively here. So yeah, that's going to be me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next one.